I just wanted to welcome everybody to the Jesup. My name is Matt Delaney and I'm the director at the Jesup. This is a real honor to be part of the library campaign that's happening here. We're one of, I think, 7 libraries in Maine that are part of this. And I want to thank Patricia for that. I've seen behind the scenes the amount of work that she has put into building awareness around domestic violence and destigmatizing it and inviting people to talk about it. So there's no better place, I think, than public libraries to have these conversations and to learn more and to hear stories. So yeah, thank you all for coming. Thank you to the panelists and the speakers that are here, to the officers that are here as well. And I will hand it over to Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Matt, and it's wonderful to be in this beautiful library. So I'd like to introduce the panelists tonight, who are Liz and Tracy. And what we're going to do is just each talk for a few minutes about our stories, and then we're going to watch the movies and then have a panel discussion, and we'll open it up to the community. So thank you so much. Maybe you could start by talking about finding your voice, so when you spoke publicly for the first time, and what tonight represents as far as that journey of speaking publicly. Just name, start with that, and then whatever you want to introduce yourself beyond that.
Okay, this is my second time speaking publicly on this. If I was talking about art waves or something else, you couldn't stop me. Well, tonight I'm speaking about my situation with domestic violence, and it's a little easier for me if I read this. So, in 1988, I sold my art in Faneuil Hall. I moved in Boston. I owned a house. I was athletic. I spent time with my family and friends. Life was pretty rosy. My parents communicated well with each other. They got divorced. They still remain friends. They come up here and visit us together. We have a very strong sense of family. I was totally unprepared to be living with the dysfunction that crept into my life, which was my ex-husband. He said he was never going to be like his father, but that's where he ended up. His grandfather had been governor of Rhode Island and a military judge, so he was accustomed to a high-end lifestyle. I later learned that he earned large amounts of money illegally, but after dating for 6 months, he needed a place to live and asked to move in. I said I wanted a commitment, I wanted to have children, I wanted a life together, and we agreed. He then began to dismantle my life through constant criticism or angry silence. He put my name on his account and cashed my checks. His name went on my car. His name was on my house. I had limited phone privileges. If he saw me on the phone, he would just hang the phone up. He would walk by and hang it up. He was a foot taller. He still is a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier, or twice my weight. And I had no way of resisting this. And I had no framework to understand what was happening. After stuffing my up-oh voice for years, I started questioning his behaviors. I started standing up. It made him more furious. He started shoving me outside. He would just, in the wintertime, he would open the door and just shove me out if he didn't like what I was doing. And there I was outside, no keys, no shoes, improper clothing. Though now I probably could have tolerated it. And I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to call it. And then when that didn't stop me from doing what he didn't like, and I didn't know what it was, he would shove me up against the refrigerator. You know, he wasn't hitting me, so I couldn't call it. He wasn't abused. In my mind, it was just shoves. But if you're pinned up against the refrigerator and his hand is going farther and farther up, it was pretty terrifying. And then he would say, if you could just stop quacking at me. He'd say, don't be telling people your stories. No, everybody knows you're crazy. They'll never believe you. I was unfamiliar with gaslighting, and I began to believe him. Like, I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me and why this was happening. He was a firefighter captain, So I called the Hancock County Sheriff's Office from the bathroom that I fled to. They called a former deputy who lived in our town, who contacted my ex-husband. Nobody came. So lesson learned. I knew I had to be really careful and very quiet. My friends eventually saw the decline, and finally one drove me to the next step. My parents stepped in to help, and we divorced. I learned about financial abuse as I had to pay alimony and give him the house. I was unprepared, however, for the post-divorce abuse. He started saying he feared for the safety of our children, and he would park in my driveway. And so I was effectively trapped in my house. If I said anything, no one questioned it. The community party wanted no part in any conflict. I kept hearing there are two sides to every story. Or they were afraid of his retribution. He was also an ambulance driver. His choice was to target me in a way that nobody could see. I was too scared and I was too ashamed to speak up, so I moved. It continued, but he was no longer in my driveway, so I felt like I had gotten free. Recently, a friend said she thought he was just an uninvolved parent, not that he was abusive. And I'm here now because I realized the cost of my silence, and I don't want to be silent anymore, and I want this to stop.
Thank you. Liz is the director of art, and the founder and the program director
Interim.
of Art Waves. This is the community's art community center. And Liz and I used to, our kids were little together in Castine. And Liz was offering to do an art project with us, and I didn't connect that it was Liz that I know from Castine. But then it took a little while, and then you said you wanted to be on a poster and you wanted to speak out. Yeah. Thank you, Liz. And Tracy, we have a mutual friend who is in the Castine Unitarian Church, and they gave us social justice grants. And Gil just kept letting me know, you have to meet Tracy. I have to put you together. I have to put the two of you together. So one day I was like, okay. And I don't know what it was. I just reached out because he'd been saying that to me. And then I called Tracy, and we were talking about getting together because Tracy is the executive director of Home in Orland, and I just thought we could collaborate professionally. We just started talking, and that's when Tracy let me know about the domestic violence and her background. And we're good friends now, and I will leave it to Tracy to continue, but I'm so glad that you're here tonight. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is my first time talking publicly about violence in my life. I talk a lot around the state about other issues within my job, working with homeless services. So I also had to write it down. It's kind of a security thing. So, I'm just going to start this by saying my adult life has been fairly peaceful, and I'm lucky to be alive today. So my recognition moment that I was in 6 years old, I heard my mother crying from the living room, and her partner had driven a vehicle through the living room of our house in the middle of the night. So I ran out the door to the nearest phone booth. We didn't have a phone in the house because we were poor and we didn't pay the phone bill. And the police came and took him away. And as we sat comforting our bruised and battered mom, I realized that we had nowhere to go. We had no money. This was in the 80s. Domestic violence shelters really weren't taking off yet. Domestic violence wasn't considered a crime at that time. I grew up in Brisbane, Australia, and this is where this happened. My older sister and I were raised by our single mother, and so one thing we learned about being in poverty in the 80s is that you were relatively invisible. You weren't in anyone's demographic, and you didn't have access to much, including safety. To survive poverty, my mother sold her body for money. She had no education, she couldn't drive. And in her quest to find the perfect father and partner, she jumped from one violent relationship to another. By the time I was 13, I'd gone to 22 schools, following the domestic violence shelter system up and down the east coast of Australia. Occasionally we had our own houses, but we got kicked out pretty quickly because of the chaotic, loud culture of domestic violence, as I'm sure the police are aware of. Most of the time, the evictions were due to domestic violence. Sometimes they were due to rent. As a kid, I'd never known a world where there was enough money to buy food or school clothing, or where I could go to sleep at night, worrying if my mother would be hurt. With no washing machine, no money for clothes, we'd rummage through, we had piles of clothes on the bathroom floor, and sometimes to get out, we'd just have to rummage through those clothes, throw them in a trash bag, and run out the door. But sometimes we didn't even get to take those sour clothes. So by the age of 13, the court system removed me from my mother's care, citing neglect as the reason. In Australia during the 80s, one couldn't count on the police or the courts to treat domestic violence as a crime, let alone look at us as victims. So oftentimes a woman would lose custody, and that was the last time I ever lived with my mother. By the time I was 18, a brutal act of sexual violence towards my mother led me to flee to the United States, where I lived here undocumented for 22 years. I had no formal education, and I wasn't legally allowed to stay because I had no money, no education, and at this point, no family. So that journey led me to Home Co-op in Orland. I ran into a group of pretty radical nuns who took me in. They gave me shelter and they gave me a chance. My mother was never able to leave the cycle of poverty or violence. The chaos took a toll in her life, and she took her life at the age of 54. My sister grew up to raise 4 kids on welfare, and she died, or took her life at the age of 41. So I ended up here in Orland, Maine, running the large nonprofit that took me in 19 years ago. I serve on boards across the state, and I made it out of violence. I'm on the other side, but I can still remember what it's like to be hungry. I can remember what it's like to wear sour clothes. I can remember what it's like to live with trauma, violence, addiction, and poverty. And I can remember what it's like to be a child with no safety. And I can also remember what it's like to receive help, and I think that's been my biggest gift in my career today. And so I've been blessed with life from the age of 18 when I landed in the United States to have a life free from violence. So I'm happy to be here today, and I'm not sure why I'm speaking up, but here I am. So thanks for coming.
Tracy, what is what is the intersection with domestic violence and homelessness? Like, how many of your clients, how often do you come across clients that tell you that they've been abused, domestic abuse?
It's really common. It's extremely common, actually, abuse, and for all genders. But typically, I guess anecdotally, I would say at least every day there's at least 2 people in our shelter who are there because they're fleeing domestic violence. The domestic violence shelters, if they're full, people would still need shelter. If somebody's experiencing domestic violence or fleeing domestic violence and comes to a traditional homeless shelter like the ones that we run, it's not the same safe space because it's not an undisclosed location. And it's not, we don't screen, everybody comes to a homeless shelter, so that can also reactivate victims. So it's a complicated place for somebody to land in trauma. We usually reach out to next step help.
So when you talk with women for intake or talking with them and they're talking about domestic violence, does it trigger you to think back on the domestic violence you went through as a child, or you put that in a compartment, or how do you dealt with that?
I've put it in a compartment. It really, it doesn't. Occasionally, it depends. If I hear it, if I can hear violence, I'm more reactivated, but consoling somebody and talking with somebody, not so much. I'm sort of in, one thing I learned as a kid is I can face almost any form of violence with and head face on, so I'm good in crisis. It's also a very difficult thing to live with. Being the strongest person in the crisis is often hard because you're facing the traumas over and over and over again.
Well, one thing interesting about the three of us is my perspective is as a mother, and Liz is the same way, and your experiences as a child. And the perspectives are really different. Like my daughter and I were really close. I thought we were really, really close. You know, my first child, and then she was actually the first person though. Myself, my son, and my daughter, and my son and myself would get angry at my daughter, and we would say, because my daughter would, hi, welcome. My daughter would not accept things that my husband would be saying. So he would be his martinet self, right, like the dictator, and we were all like just working overtime to keep the peace and, you know, go along with it. But she wouldn't sometimes, especially as she was, you know, 13, 14. And we got mad at her. We both got mad at my daughter, and we would say, Jackie, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? Basically telling her to stop and not blaming her, not blaming him. And so things like that went on, and anyway, with the divorce, it was a really hard time for us, my daughter and I, and I felt like she was kind of putting me in the same category as him, and I didn't understand it. He's obviously the abuser. And she told me at one time, she said, she called me abusive. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, you neglected me. You kept me in there, you didn't get me out. And it was really hard for her to say that. And I felt like what really helped us is for me to own that. And actually John, we reached out to John because my daughter was wanting to we realized we needed therapy, and I reached out to John, and I was like, John, could you help us find someone? And that really was a breakthrough for us. We spent a weekend in therapy together, and it was me owning it, and it was a really hard thing. When she first told me that, I said, no, I'm not going to own that. There's no way. I was not, you know. And then I realized, yeah, like, and you know, I had I was locked, you know. I had my own reasons. I felt I was trapped, but the door was there. There was no door for my daughter. And Tracy, do you feel that your mother, do you think she thought that she was keeping you from it? Or was it really like an open sight, like through your whole childhood, the chaos?
I mean, we didn't have a day without violence, so I don't think there would have been a time for her to take inventory of that type of thing. It was so intense and constant. She protected, what we had this kind of interesting dynamic where she would attempt to protect us from something really horrific. There were kind of layers of it for us, and with animal stuff, right? So she would, in her way to protect us from that type of trauma, she would stand up to the person. And so what that did to us was put us in this impossible situation of, you know, please don't stand up for us, this will be worse for you. And so as a child, you're dancing on that relationship where your mom is going to protect you, but if your mom protects you, she could be stabbed, right? And so it was always, you know, can you protect us a little quieter, please? Or can you not stand up for this? Or so you're in this sort of reversal of instinct, and I think that keeps you really isolated as a kid. It's just a constant confusion, if that makes any sense.
One thing I think one thing the therapist pointed out to me is she said the dynamic of myself and my daughter when my daughter was little is that I was here and my daughter was here. So my daughter was protecting me and trying to comfort me and terrified of what was happening to me. It was a reversal. Tracy, did you feel there was a reversal?
Absolutely. I mean, there were times, you're a fireman, I felt like I was Superman when I was a kid. I'll go in, I even tried to stab a guy, which got me stabbed in my shoulder. I was 8 years old. I didn't have fear. I thought I could save my sister and my mother. I was the only one who could go to school. My sister couldn't go to school. I was social, I was outgoing. I had things that my sister and my mother didn't have for lots of different reasons. So I felt like it was up to me to keep them safe, which made going to school impossible because there was that sort of 6-hour day where you don't have any control over what's happening at home. So it made learning kind of hard. But yeah, protecting, just making sure we became really skilled at communicating with our eyes. So if I come home from school, I could tell if I have what the next move has to be in the household. So if anything, it took the parental relationship and it made it sort of 3 equal people.
Yeah.
Except one was 30 and the other 2 were.
Yeah, infantilization, I think
Yeah.
that I felt that it was me and the kids. We were the kids together.
Yeah,
There wasn't,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, my mom was my best friend. It felt like, yeah.
Liz, can you talk about the role of did you ever tell anybody what was going on? What's in the role of the community, your friends? Talk about that.
I couldn't, because what people saw was completely the opposite of what was going on. And I don't know if I made it worse by just having everything as a celebration. And I remember thinking, oh, the last person's going to leave, and then it's just the kids would be in bed, and the last people would go, and I was in trouble. You know, I would review what I did, and there was just nothing I could do.
And also, you're not
And I couldn't say anything because he had already told me that I was crazy and no one would believe me.
And also, if you think about the stereotype of the domestic abuse victim, maybe a woman's, with her head down, you're not that, you are smiling, you seem to be have a lot of energy, so you're not the stereotype, so it wasn't like someone would observe that you were being
Except
abused.
that I spent a lot of time like this.
Oh,
see
really?
some there were some pictures of I helped coach Little League, and there were times when I was just sitting like this, in the background. It's I could tell that was when it's I couldn't breathe. I was so afraid.
In the last year before my husband and I, before it all blew up, that was when I decided to take all my boxes of photos and organize them. And I put them all on the lawn in a blanket, and there was boxes and boxes. And I found pictures of me when I was in Castine, when very early on, my daughter maybe was 1. And I'm sitting on the porch, and my legs are covered with bruises. And I'm thinking, our neighbors, we used to go to their house all the time. Why didn't no one ever say anything?
Because I thought you were clumsy.
Maybe. And again, it wouldn't have squared with maybe my demeanor or what they thought of him. And Tracy, how about you in the community? Can we talk about that? Was there ever did you feel isolated? Did anybody know what was going on? Did anybody want to help you?
A lot of people knew. I traveled so much, so we were never a family that stayed in one place very long. So it wasn't like we had long-term connections in our neighborhoods that could notice it. But certainly, you could hear it if you were our neighbor, it often played out very publicly. My mother was a pretty serious alcoholic, and so were her partners usually. And I remember one time I was at school, and I think I was 3rd or 4th grade, and I was playing marbles. It was a really good game of marbles. I was winning, and and all of the kids started running to the fence And I just had a sinking feeling, I know, but I ran to the fence, and they're all standing there, and my mother is just covered in blood, and her partner is there. And so it was so public that I became really, I put myself in isolation, in that I didn't make friends, I didn't, there was nobody coming over to the house, and I went to 22 schools because every time it happened, and my mother, like I said, she was a close friend, so I could do what I want, and if I wanted to change schools, she would change schools. And so every time some act of violence came out publicly to my school system, I had to leave the school. I couldn't. The other part of it was that we were very aware that in the 80s, I'm not sure if that's the same in the United States, but domestic violence was a reason that moms were losing custody of their children. And so we were mindful of that, and that's where that protection thing came in. So we did a very good job at covering it. I didn't have bruises. My mother, oftentimes, she was, I don't need to go into detail, but there were obvious signs that this was a bruised and broken family. School teachers, the police were really wonderful, but they were bound by the lack of enforcement at the time. Police can't just arrest you if it's not considered a law, right? So I think that was a struggle for them, because we were pretty cute, cheeky kids in the back of a cruiser. You got a lollipop. Like, I was pretty smart and cocky, and I was streetwise. I grew up with nothing but violence. So I learned how to make relationships with everybody.
It's amazing that you're such a calm person, and to think that you grew up in that chaos is just, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was 13 years of my life a long time ago. I've spent a lot of time. When you're undocumented, you can't really be who you are. There's no way I couldn't be calm in a country where I'm not supposed to be. So I kind of had to, I went from this childhood of having to hide to an adulthood where, from 18 to I became a citizen, I think 5 years ago. So for that period of time, I had to really learn to check myself. I couldn't be loud and out about certain things. And I conditioned myself to do that.
I grew up in chaos. My mother was violent, my father was very cold, and he was somewhat violent. And I had a string of violent relationships. Like, they were pretty much all abusive except for one, and then I thought he was too boring, so I broke up. But could we talk about that? Like, if Liz wants to say if she was in other abusive relationships, in addition to the one that she talked about, and also after that, Tracy, if you ended up following that pattern to some degree at all, and Liz. And also your background. If your background was there abuse or chaos in your?
No, that's why I had zero coping skills, and I had no idea. It's like, what is this? I had never heard parents talk to each other the way he was speaking to me. I had a good dad. He's 90, he's still alive, but he never treated my mother like that. So I just had never seen it. So when these things were coming up, I was like, just didn't know where to put it, didn't know what it was, but I knew things were wrong and things were very, very bad. And then when I spoke up, I was so when things started going bad, I had zero resources. I had a pretty tame childhood. I think I went for more exciting guys because everything was so tame and boring. So I would go for bad boys on motorcycles or something.
Same result, but different.
Yeah. So I ended up with married when I was 21 or 22. My parents came and were really supportive, and it was, I think it lasted 3 months. He hit me. It had never been hit like that. And deliberately punching me. And as he was hitting me, I was saying, "What are you doing?" I kept saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And then I left.
Is there any questions for any of us that any of you have? Or comments about any situation that you might have, or anything you want to say? John?
If I may, I just, first of all, just thank you for, all of you, for sharing these experiences with us. I mean, I know how hard it is, and I just appreciate it so much. One thing you've alluded to but not spoken about, I think, is how important it was to make sure the children were all right. I mean, I know that it was part of your experience,
Oh, yeah.
and I believe it was part of yours. And when people say, why didn't you just leave?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is trying to make something good out of such chaos and such violence is an impossible task. But every mother I've ever worked with in this kind of situation has said, it's because I wanted to protect the children from it. And running at first wasn't going to make that work. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. I'll start and then we'll go down the line if that's okay. But my ex was sadistic, and he would have these huge grudges about people, and he would turn on someone on a dime, and he would gleefully, be gleeful about destroying and crushing them. Like, as an example, there was this man who was a fan. He stepped up and he did this book on my ex, and he put his own money into it, and it was a labor of love, and they put like years into it. And then they put it up for sale, and it didn't sell. And I remember him writing a letter to my ex and saying, is there any way that you could maybe buy 50 of them or something, or 100, because I'm really losing money, I'm really in trouble. And I knew there was going to be trouble because he was like pierced his pride. And so just because of that, he was going to destroy him. And he not only refused to buy the books, but he refused to promote them. And the guy was telling him he was going to kill himself, and my ex still wouldn't do it. I mean, wouldn't budge, it didn't matter to him. So just to say that, I knew that if I left, he was going to punish us, and it would be so much worse than it was. So that was one of the things I knew it would be worse when I left. I also knew that at least when I was with him, if we were getting along, I had some say about the parenting, and so like I don't want my son to watch this violent movie, so if we were getting along, maybe he would turn it off. If we weren't together, he wouldn't pay any heed to that, and he would again be punishing me. So I was just aware that it would be a lot worse. And so yes, that's exactly right. Like, I felt like I was protecting them. I didn't know that they were suffering and they could hear things and see things and feel things in the house. And I just thought, I'll just put a happy face on and just get through this, and it'll be a lot worse if I left. So how about you, Liz?
Pretty much the same. And it got worse.
It did.
It did,
It
exactly.
did get worse, yes.
Yeah.
It actually did for me too. Yeah.
Oppositional, everything you could do to make it difficult. Still.
Yeah, still, yeah, it doesn't, it never ends,
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, but you wouldn't say you're sorry that you left, would you?
No.
But still got worse.
I really felt like I had no choice. I felt like it would have been much worse, because then they would have witnessed a lot more violence,
Yeah,
because he was getting out of control. And then when he lost control of me, it was like the floodgates were open, and he could do whatever he wanted to do.
it only does get worse, this kind of thing, it never gets better, it just gets worse. And Tracy, did you feel that your mother was protecting you? And I also want to ask you about your mother, like if you were ever angry at her for keeping you in this or putting you in this situation, or because it was one violent boyfriend after the other.
Right, so the protecting part, yes, it doesn't feel like it in the traditional sense, but every partner or boyfriend came with food, shelter, a house, and the security that we couldn't afford, typically, right? So I think, I didn't get to see my mother while I'm an adult, so I haven't asked, I can't ask these questions, but I think a lot of her decisions were based on if she stayed or if she went back, were based on two things. I think she stayed and to keep us secure with all the other things, food and all of those things. she also stayed because I can just imagine, and I'm just projecting, that a single mom with a couple of kids is hard and lonely, and I'm sure we gave her a run for money. So I think she always sought a partner and was afraid that she couldn't provide food for us or safety. Was I angry at her? You know, and this is the part, I think, that it's been the biggest struggle, because I think yes, yeah. I used to get angry at my mother because she would fight for her life in these situations, and it would be, you know, can't you just be quiet? You know, can't you just fight a little quieter? I had this real horrible conflict where I was angry at her, not for not protecting us, but I was angry at her for standing up for us, which is such a messed up way to be, but my mother was my hero, an amazingly strong human being, and all of the things that I have that I value, I got from my mother. I like to think I'm a kind person, I'm a strong person, I do good where I can. So all of the good things came from that same woman, and so it's really hard to, it's sort of like, I was in the United States for 9/11, it was the great equalizer, right? When you go through trauma together, you can't be angry at the person beside you, because you've gone through a trauma together, and you've seen them in their their deepest pain. And so I can't be angry at a woman that I've gone through war with. She's my fellow soldier, even though she was my mother. I'm angry she took her life, that I'm angry about.
And Tracy, in between, she would have a boyfriend, and then there'd be a time probably when she didn't, and you were just with her. Was it peaceful, and was it a nice time? And then were you maybe angry that, why is there another guy in the picture?
Yeah, I constantly say that, why are we enough, right? We thought having a couple kids would be the center of a 30-year-old woman's life. Why would she need anything else but a couple kids? So I was very upset at that. I felt like, why aren't we enough? Why isn't it enough just to be at home with my sister and myself and being together? Those moments were very brief. She was never alone very long. So that made me, yeah, I didn't like that, but that's...
Also, in the beginning, they're not abusive, right? You don't know that this is what they're like. So, I mean, that happened with me. You get swept off your feet. I mean, so like Liz, were there red flags?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But did I pay attention? No, because I wanted to have kids. I wanted to get married. It was like, okay, we're on this. Let's do it.
That's right. It's
And,
easy to turn a blind eye
yeah,
when you want
Yeah,
something.
and it wasn't like it was black and blue. It wasn't like there were big fights. It was just like, it's like the frog in the pot and the water just keeps getting hotter and hotter.
And also minimizing, like, who doesn't minimize? Like, it'd be hard to think that you didn't minimize, that you minimized because of the horrific violence, but you didn't minimize it, did you? You go ahead and say it's not as bad as some people have. I don't think you could have done that.
I don't know what other people have.
Yeah.
I didn't have much, it was all sort of introspection. Our world was just chaos.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could speak more about the red flags that were kind of subtle in the beginning, and then what advice you would have, for example, if a friend or someone in your community is sharing those, like how you approach talking about that in a way that is not, like telling them what to do or like taking over. And then I have another question that's kind of related to that, but
Do you want to say the other question, please?
and my other question is more related to like a community response, like what in your experience you think would have been really helpful from other people. I mean, you already mentioned a couple of things, but I think particularly in your case where you said that it was so overt and people didn't react or like visibly react to it. I'm very curious to hear from your experiences what you think would have been really helpful or what can also be done, because evidently people keep not or find it hard to react or like, yeah, do something? Like what can be done?
Well, thank you, I'd like to talk about the red flags that I saw. Well, one of them on our first date, he was like downing double scotches. Like, I didn't know anyone that ordered double scotches, and like one after the other. So
It's
there
a
was
sipping thing, not a, like you sip scotch,
Right.
right? So like,
It
wow.
was doubles, and it was like one after the other. So right away, I should have been alerted, like, this person has a drinking problem. The other thing is, I guess the other thing was that, so we were, so I quit we were moving very fast. That's a red flag. He told me he loved me the night we met. How can you tell? I was like, it made me feel really good, but he didn't know me. How should it be a compliment to be told that someone loves you when they don't even know you? And then immediately, like, talking about getting married or, moving back east with me. Like, it was just really, really fast. And then another one would have been, like, just 2 months in, I think I was ready to move in with him. Like, quit my job, my career as a journalist, sold my car, gave up my apartment. And really, that night, after I'd done all those things, that's when I saw his temper for the first time, and it was a big one. Like, he got really, really, for over nothing. He just blew up. It was a shock, because until then he had been just like wooing, just one, like Mr. Romance, then just blowing up out of nothing. And, but I wanted it to happen so much, and also I was trapped. Like, went from independent to dependent, and it was also kind of like a fairy tale, like sweep me off my feet, and so I was in denial, like I didn't want to see what I was seeing. So I was saying, oh, it's because of stress, like, because I'm going to be moving in with him. I was giving all these excuses, and I literally like blinded myself, like I just didn't see this, and really it was all there that night. So let's take red flags first. Could you talk about the red flags?
Same thing, the drinking, the magnanimous with everybody around, and not so great, and they were gone. Most of all, I would say that for me, I was ignoring my uh-oh voice. Like, my uh-oh voice was screaming, this is wrong, don't do it, and I just kept pushing it aside and just kept going on.
Listen to your gut.
Listen to your gut. And my gut was like punching me and squirming.
Yeah.
And I just, and it was like, I would just go like this and just keep going on. And drugs, that's another part of the equation.
Oh, he was doing drugs.
Right. And I was just like watching it. And I don't know why I stayed. Or he was living in my house. And he had pretty much taken over, he moved his business in. And it was like, how do you get out of this? Because this is my house. I
Be
can't
really careful. I hear so often, I hear about they're going out, they're just starting to go, it's still casual. They're not really making it to a commitment, but all of a sudden the guy like loses his place, or hey, and then, well, it sounds like a good idea, we're getting along, and they come in the house and then you can't get them out, so that's. And Tracy, can I ask you, like, when these guys came into your life in the beginning, did they appear like this guy's gonna be a really good one, or did you always sense when there was a new boyfriend, oh, this is trouble?
No, they were most of the time. Everyone was nice to me at first, because they all wanted a relationship with my mother, so her kids had to be a part of that, and so. But for red flags, for me, it would start with things like if, and remember I'm a childhood perspective, so if my mother would suddenly lose control of her independence as a parent, so he would pick me up from school, not her. The way he treated, or they would treat our animals, or another thing, temper.
You say they, was your mother abusive to the animals?
No,
the boyfriends.
Different.
Yeah.
No, my mother was not an abusive person at all.
So they started to be nasty to the animals?
Yeah, well, not nasty as much as you just the temper with animals, if we had animals, yeah. So that was often, so I think that was mostly it for me, how they treated the environment that that I was in, how my mother lost control of her decisions related to me really early. That was usually a red flag. And when she was no longer the parent in control of who I owe my life. Yeah. And
Denying reality. That was the biggest red flag, and that was the hardest one to stuff down.
I mean, you were denying reality.
He would deny reality,
Oh,
and I
okay.
would try and adjust to that, like driving along. He hit something, broke the mirror on the car, and it was like, he said it didn't happen. And I don't know, how do you file that? I mean, there was no mirror there, I heard crash. And speaking up and saying that would just mean I was stupid, or I was like, I didn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah.
So that denial of reality is a walking.
And also sort of controlling friendships. You know, judgments aside with what I'm about to say, but in my mother's work, there were a lot of friendships. There was sort of it was a legalized work in Australia, and she had friends, and as soon as a new person would come on board, very early on, those friends couldn't be a part of her life. I suspect if we had family, that would be the case as well. My mother would lose contact with anybody that could provide any kind of support to her. So she wasn't able to talk with her friends. I embraced it, right, because I didn't want my mother to do that kind of work. And so for me, it was such a conflict because every boyfriend took us away from that job for her, which was good, but not for her.
I want to answer the question about what advice you would give to someone who you suspect might be going through that. Before I do, can I bring the officer up to sit here with us? Thank you. And thank you so much for being here tonight with us. And could you just introduce yourself and explain what your role is with the police department?
Sure. I'm Sergeant Douglas Brumbrett. I'm an evening shift supervisor here at Bar Harbor and Mount Desert Police Departments. I manage a squad of 3 or 4 officers during the night shift patrol.
Are you on patrol in the streets too? Do you go on calls?
I am, yes.
And how long have you been with the police department?
I've been with Bar Harbor for 8 years. Prior to that, I was with the city of Globe, Arizona.
Was that an affluent area?
Yes, it was.
So would you say it was similar to Bar Harbor? Or?
No, it was more city-like, more like Bangor, Portland, a lot more populated.
Could you just sum up the domestic, like Bar Harbor, just like Camden where I live, everyone thinks of it as a rich town. But could you sum up what the domestic violence situation is in Bar Harbor? Is there domestic violence in Bar Harbor?
Absolutely. Domestic violence happens every day, everywhere, across the nation. Here for Bar Harbor, for us, I spoke last week with the other group in Northeast Harbor, but for us, we're dealing with mostly tourism. So a lot of our domestic violence happening at the hotels. A lot of people from out of state come here for vacation.
So like Airbnbs and stuff like that?
Airbnbs, the hotels. There's a couple of frequent flyers that we're at the house a few times a year. There's some other circumstances, but for the most part, it's 1 or 2 time thing, and then these folks are on their way moving somewhere else. But it does happen very frequently. We're getting nightly calls during the summertime, domestic violence all the time.
How often when you go to a house is it usually who usually calls?
It varies. Sometimes it's a neighbor that's here and yelling. Sometimes it's the wife that finally gets the courage to make that call. Sometimes it's the children. Sometimes it's a coworker. Sometimes it's the district attorney's office giving us a referral, or next step, or making witness advocate for the district attorney's office. It comes from all kinds of sources.
How often when you go on a domestic violence call does the woman say that nothing happened?
Quite frequently, it's
consistent.
Consistent. And can you introduce yourself?
I'm Chris Dickens, patrol officer. Sorry, sit down.
Consistent. So could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. The domestic violence station. Is it okay if
Yeah,
it's
please.
So Tracy, you had brought up kind of your experience with law enforcement not really having a lot of, sometimes not having the teeth to deal with, you know, the legal teeth, so to speak, to deal with some of the incidents they were encountering. So we're lucky here in the state of Maine, any intimate partner or spousal violence essentially has its own section in the criminal code. And one of the differences that is part of that own section is that if we're required as law enforcement, if there's been an assault and we can substantiate a predominant offender, we have to make an arrest. So that accomplishes a couple things. Obviously, in the moment, it removes the offender from the home or the workplace, wherever it's occurred. Starts some processes with the court. One of the most important being typically the person will be assigned a bail condition. They can't have contact with the spouse or the partner or the children or all, and typically can't return to the residence to be with those folks.
Do you know when that started for the state of Maine, like how far back?
The statutory arrest, I mean, in the big scheme of things, it's relatively recent. I mean, we're not, this isn't going back.
Like not in the
30 or 40
90s,
years.
right?
I would bet it's post-90s.
Yeah.
Could I ask you something now? Someone told me that they have a program with woman offenders, and I've heard of that, and they said that every woman in there was actually a victim. So could you tell me what you do, or where you are of the dynamic when the guy says the woman hurt him, maybe she was defensive, and then she's going along with it because she doesn't want to get him in trouble. But tell me about
Do you
that.
want to touch on how we kind of tease out predominant?
Yeah, so when we respond to domestic violence calls, I'll just start right from the very beginning. From the time we get in the call, we're trying to gather as much information as possible. Weapons involved, any injuries, is this verbal, is there kids in the house, are the people still on the scene, or are they leaving in a vehicle? So we try to get all those details. We always go with a minimum 2-officer response to those types of, some of the most deadliest encounters that law enforcement faces across the country. Domestic violences. So when we get there, our primary objective is to take control of the scene and make everybody safe. So we always separate the parties. Under law, we have the authority to do a protective sweep. So even if someone's telling us you can't enter my house, it's my property, get a warrant, we can more or less tell them to go pound sand, get out of the way, and we can go into someone's house and sweep it for our safety, for everybody else's safety out there. It's not a search, we're not going through dresser drawers or anything like that, it's just for people, for our safety. We're separating those parties. Usually one officer will speak to one of the parties, another officer will speak to the other parties. We always get 2 different sides of the story. In the middle is always the truth. So she hit me first, nope, he threw me down on the bed, he strangled me. So we're looking for signs of physical evidence as well. So if someone's claiming a strangulation, do we see red marks, do we see bruising, is their clothing torn? All these types of things we're really looking for. If it's a claim that the male, punched the wife in the face, or the guy's knuckles, his arms, is the house in disarray? Does that show us sign of struggle? There's children in the house. They're our best witnesses because they're so candid and so open about everything. So if we can get them in a safe environment, even if they're young, 3, 4, 5 years old. Yeah, mommy pushed down dad and smacked him in the face. So we're taking all.
Will that hold up in court? Is that valuable?
Of course.
A child says?
So we're taking all this into account. Then we typically meet up and we'll discuss, okay, this person said this to me, this would observe.
We'll sound check each other and sometimes switch, and we might each talk with, you talk with the wife and I talk with the husband or female and male. We might switch and have our own conversations and again.
To see if stories match and stuff like that.
Right, to see if the stories change, and typically they will, if someone's lying, that they can't keep their story straight, and then they'll start the line around their story.
What you would do if you feel that the woman has been abused, maybe even the kids have said it, but the woman is adamant that he didn't hurt me. Is there anything you will try to do to have a woman cooperate?
So some of these, one of the things we impress on everybody is that unless there's an immediate safety issue, like we've got time. So a scenario like you're talking about, if I was working with a woman that type of resistance is pretty normal. Tracy, you talked about, I think everyone's kind of touched on, being financially, you look at the housing crisis that we have in Hancock County.
Right.
What's the first thought when any spouse, if
Right.
the other spouse is going to jail, particularly that spouse is the mortgage holder or
Yeah.
on the lease or whatnot. So in situations like that, I oftentimes, if the person is really agreeable, like I might take a pretty deep dive into the relationship, and really try and get a sense of, because we know there are other markers, particularly with men around not just domestic violence, but intimate partner violence, non-consensual sex. Oftentimes there may be violence towards animals in the house. There may be what we consider a high level of pornography consumption.
So you'll ask the woman about those
Yeah,
things?
they're not comfortable questions, and a lot of times, I know it puts particularly women in a strange spot, like I gotta have this conversation with a dude, this guy's asking me that, so it takes a little bit of work to get there, but, I find, asking a lot of those questions that go beyond, like the incident that is right in front of us, oftentimes will backfeed into having a conversation about, now let's talk about tonight. But all that background information is really helpful, for us as law enforcement, in terms of really looking at what is this spouse, or what does the family need in terms of safety planning? What information are we going to pass? Because all that, I'm going to send all that stuff that you tell me, I'm going to include that when I make that report to the DA. Because that background information really is foundational to really looking at the offender as well. So.
And especially if the next morning they recant, you still have the information.
Absolutely. Another part of the domestic violence statute, I think we've seen victimless prosecution yet, have we? It's embedded in the statute where domestic violence in the state of Maine, I believe, is the only crime that under certain circumstances the courts can move ahead and still attempt a prosecution without a cooperating victim.
I'd like to know how often that happens.
Not well, I think so far not for
I've
us.
never heard of that.
So-
That's kind
So it is in the statutes, but you think about just kind of how constricted, constitutionally based. I think it's difficult for our
Well, I
DAs to
find
go
that-
ahead with that.
I know in Knox County, the district attorney, I think they victim blame. Because they're always saying, well, the victim didn't cooperate, that's why we couldn't prosecute it. I think it's just excuses because they don't want to prosecute it. And there's a lot they can do without the victim. Sometimes they have a whole bunch of stuff and they still aren't prosecuting it, so I don't really buy that. Could you comment about, in Bar Harbor, what the difference would be with when you respond to wealthy homes, big homes, and maybe people who don't have much money where it comes to domestic violence?
Yeah, so domestic violence runs from the wealthy to the poor. It's all up and down the spectrum of things. When we go to a wealthy home where people well off, in my opinion, they're very standoffish. They're not as open. Whereas if I go to a trailer park per se, or low-income residents, they're just giving us everything. And just blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, slow down a minute, tell me what's going on. Everything from what actually has happened to what happened last week to last year, and then we're way off topic. It's like, all right, let's, yeah, so there is kind
And
of...
incriminating themselves probably at the same time.
Oh, yeah, you get all the spontaneous statements from them and just, yeah, I did this. And, a lot of them are pretty candid about their responses too. Yeah, I beat her up, she needed it, she just going to shut her mouth. Or, it does happen. But we go to a upscale home, I guess, and people, the financial burden, what am I going to do if he gets arrested or she gets arrested? Where am I going to go? Where are our kids going to go? He's going to get full custody. He's got the better paying job. These are all worries in the victim. So that's when they close up on us. That's when they don't want to talk.
That's
they don't-
fear.
Yeah, that's
I'm
fear.
sure.
Wait, you can say something, yes.
Well, I'm just curious, because I've heard it wasn't illegal. I saw on one of the posters that it's a misdemeanor, domestic violence is a misdemeanor. But to me, it's violence, right? So why do we couch it in it's domestic? Because it's happening to women, and I guess, like, I don't know if this has ever happened, but if you went to somebody's house who had been the victim of violence and she blew his head off, that's to me self-defense, right? Like stand your ground, all those other things we hear when people get in heated conversations and they're afraid, so they stood their ground
Right.
and they were perfectly within their rights. Why is it not the same thing? Because I'm getting very angry that we're qualifying it so that it's sort of okay for you to beat up on women, but it's every other law.
Yeah, misdemeanor, and also, for my situation, we've been together for 29 years, of course he's done it before, but they said that it's a first offense, because the first time it was, brought to the court, so there's gonna be no jail time. I saw that right up front, the judge is not gonna give him any jail time because they consider it a first offense. That is ridiculous. And I cooperated completely. I told them everything. They had pictures of my bruises, they had pictures of the door that he broke down to get to me. The police were going to testify. He got a deferred disposition, they call it, which means that you plead guilty. He pled guilty to 5 or 6 crimes, including pushing the phone away when I was trying to reach for it, on and on, holding me captive for like 4 hours in the bed. Pled guilty to all of it. Deferred disposition means 2 years or 1 year of good behavior, not good behavior to the abused person, because he was still haranguing me through the courts. It's dismissed. It's actually dismissed. The domestic violence that he pled guilty is not even on his record. If he has another girlfriend that wants to look at his record, it's not going to be there. He had a fine of less than $3,000. He walked out of that after the year when they finished. He spoke out and publicly said, it was dismissed, that means I didn't do it, basically calling me publicly a liar. And that's what happened in the state of Maine. And that's what I see happens over and
I
over
don't
again.
understand that.
But as far as prosecuting these people, I've seen them dismissed due to the backlog of the court system, especially with the pandemic. Especially, we've seen a lot of it, cases being pled down to minor offenses.
So you mean across the board, are they more lenient with domestic abuse, or do you think just across the board they're not
It
prosecuting?
sounds like it's just,
Personal opinion, I think it's across the board. Your frustration is our frustration as well. Us as law enforcement, we're out there, we're risking our lives, we swore the oath to protect the citizens of the towns. We go there and we do our very best. We try to be diligent and thorough with the investigations, document when we can. Our primary goal is to make sure people are safe at the end of the night. Whether that's making the arrest, which we're mandated to do if we have a predominant aggressor. If there's children involved, make that Department of Health and Human Service referral.
we're a small community, and anybody can call us or walk into the PD at any time. And we work with a number of individuals or families where maybe they're not able to report really the breadth or depth of what's going on, but maybe they have concern for the next spouse. Even something as simple as that. And that's hey Sarge, I talked to so-and-so tonight, I'm gonna put up on the board for guys to patrol that neighborhood a couple times a day. It's nothing that we report back to anybody. The other partner doesn't have to be aware, but that puts it squarely on our radar and just becomes one other thing that we take care of during the day. It's a very easy thing for us to do. That's never a no. And sometimes we might even do that on our own, like, hey, I hear things.
Yeah.
If we get the call to the house, we have that backstory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we know that there's problems.
Exactly.
So it also helps us on our response, keeping us safe as well. So it's kind of a dual purpose.
Thank you, and I do want to answer your question. Thank you for being so patient. But we'll go down the line, but I think the best thing, if you're worried about someone and you feel like they're trapped in this, the worst thing to do is be impatient with them. And also be judging them, and maybe acting or even saying, like, what's wrong with you? Like, because it's very obvious to us when you're on the outside. Or shaming them, or really judging them, because there's always a time, it seems like I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of women who have been in domestic abuse since I started finding our voices, and there's always something, it seems, that is sort of the light bulb moment, or that, okay, that's it for me. And until you see it, you don't see it. And you could be talking over and over again. You could sit, and I even get frustrated sometimes when I'm talking to women, I'm like, it's so obvious. But, but then I have to remember that I would not have let it, it's like there's I feel like it's almost like you're in a cult, you know, and you get brainwashed and your brain fogs. And the important thing, I think, the best thing you could do sometimes is if your friend can get away, like if you could say, hey, let's go away for a few days, or just to be able to defog your brain so that it starts to get some clarity, but really just let her know that you're there for her. And that way, when it comes to the moment when she's like ready, or she's wants to make a call, or she's ready to do that, she knows who to call. And so many times you get so isolated when you're in this that there's nobody left to call because everyone's fed up with you, they turn their back on you, they don't want to, and you're feeling that, and then you really, really are trapped. Do you have anything to add to that?
I think it was really helpful when people just stated what they were observing and nothing else.
Do you have anything to add to that, Tracy?
You know, as far as a child in the situation, I think I had to have been the unluckiest lucky kid on the planet, because every single school teacher and librarian and cop knew me by my first name and took us under their wing. The Chinese restaurant used to come out the back door and give us food. I think if you have a child in your life, and the best thing you can do is just be a present, safe adult. We used to have this thing where people put a picture on their mailbox. It was a safe home. But for me, so many people knew what was happening in our world, and so many teachers stepped up to help. Unfortunately, we were at the time in the 80s. There wasn't an envelope around domestic violence. It actually wasn't even illegal in the early days of the 80s. So there wasn't to be present in that kid's life. If you start to notice, for me, I would dissociate for long periods of time. Just stare into space. I didn't do well at school. I was a bedwetter. Things like that. Fidgeting, reactive. If you notice a child that is reacting or acting out in school, you know, just sort of be that adult in the kid's life. That's really the only reason I think I'm alive. We just had one caring adult after the other just scoop us up in those times, and it got us through to the point where it was a prosecutable, savable thing where we could be pulled from the house and be okay.
There's 45 women on these posters. The full set is 45 posters, and they are all over
And
Maine.
our governor.
And our governor.
Our governor.
Yes.
The state of Maine is right in the middle.
Yes, and we take them town to town. We just load up the car with these posters. We go to a town. We're going to be in Skowhegan on Friday. We're doing this with the Skowhegan Women's Club. And we just get out of the car, we go up and down the main street, we take these posters, we get them in your window, and have really important conversations along the way. And anybody that wants to join us, get in touch.
And
Thank
is
you.
it a power wheel, or what is it?
Yes, and this is the power and control wheel that usually they will give you when you go to a domestic abuse agency. They can go behind a closed door and they'll hand it to you. But we want to get it out for everyone to know. And Liz's is right behind the TV. Liz did one, and she's the most recent one. But it is, you see the pattern, because it's the wheel that was created in the 1980s by a Betters program. They just, in talking to women, the same thing kept coming up. So these guys have a toolkit that they use. It's the same thing, but the details are different. So we give these to the women and ask them to customize them when they come on with us. And that's what you see, is the customized power and control wheel. And when you see many at once, then you start to see the pattern.
It was really helpful to go through it, and I've been handed that quite a few times, and I was like, oh, yeah. But I actually finally, after years and years, I finally sat down and started writing, and it was like, it was much worse than I
Yes,
realized.
it's worse than me.
Yeah.
And I had a woman come to my house once, and she was sitting down and she was like, well, I have to be home, I have to leave because I'm only like allowed to be out for
Yeah.
like 25 minutes. And I'm like, what? And he said, oh yeah, you know, I have to go back. And then we started talking more, and then she was actually doing some work for Finer Voices, and then she started to say, well, you know, he does this, that, and the other thing. I said, just 1 second, I brought her the wheel. She underlined almost everything on it, and she was like, oh my God, like just what was happening to her face when she was realizing, because you don't, until you start doing it, you don't underline, circling, like, wow.
It's a good feeling.
Like you probably thought I wouldn't have anything on here, it wasn't so, you know,
Yeah,
people
it's
minimize,
like-
people minimize what they're going through.
Yeah.
Because,
And I could have gone on and on.
yeah,
I had to
you
do that in
went
paper,
on, yeah.
yeah, sorry about that. But what's really come about, and I'm getting more comfortable with that, is that I have a lot of women who come up and say, happened to me. And what I'd like to see is for them to be a little bit more upfront, or just stand a little straighter, because usually it's like, happened to me.
Whispering, yeah.
Yeah. I'm getting, you know, I like to make some time and just talk about it and let them know that I'm available. So I think that's really powerful, and thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, this was a wonderful.
Thank you.